Streaming.
No AJ again. It's just us two.
We are ageless.
He's just super lazy. That's why he's not here, huh?
Yeah, what a piece of poop. He comes on and he's like, guys, sorry, I don't care about this podcast at all. And that's what he said.
I texted him earlier, then I was like, I wonder if he's like trying to sleep. I'm like, what if I'm keeping him up right now and he's trying to sleep and not feel sicky?
Oh, yeah, poor guy. Yeah, the Aj has come down with the sickness, so he is taking care of himself. And so you'll get just me and Jake for at least today and I guess yesterday and probably tomorrow. So it looks like we'll probably have a week of Ajuless. Ajuless. Yeah, we are our beef steak sandwich with no juice.
With no juice.
Jake is the beef. I'm the bread. You're missing the
hey, I like bread though too.
All right, Jake's the bread. I'll be the beef.
I'm excited to get him back.
Kinda. I'm excited to get him back too.
Yeah, it'll be nice to get some time in the seat for him, and I know he's excited, and we're obviously excited to have him. So hopefully we can get him back tomorrow. If not, next week, of course.
Yeah, he'll be back sooner than later. Hopefully, we'll have to bring him back. He's speaking like this in the mic. He'll sound super sexy.
Dude, I lost my voice. Oh, you remember when I lost my voice like a couple weeks or a month ago? It was like that for. It was like 5 days. It was just all squeak. I could barely talk at all. Yeah. So I wonder. Hopefully, he won't lose his voice. I have no idea, like, if that's even happening to him right now. But
yeah, I know it's hard to tell those things over text. But he seems miserable from.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, poor guy.
My wife always makes fun of me when I'm sick and says that what was it called, the man cold?
Yeah,
she calls it.
I was gonna say.
I'm like, okay, like. I'm not that bad, but she claims that I'm bad.
Yeah. Well, it is always the person who's being the baby is always the hardest for them to see. And I'm saying that as someone who I know for a fact that I'm often being a baby. And it's taken me, first of all, it's taken me a lot of years just to realize that. And now I'm at this point in my life where I might recognize that I'm being a baby, but I'm not really. I don't even care because you know what? I'm generally so I'm really sensitive and I'm soft and all that. But as a person, I consider myself pretty tough. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's like we can be a little soft. It's all right. It's good for you.
Yeah, I feel like I don't do too much or complain but apparently I do. She doesn't say that I complain, but she'll refer to the man cold every single time. So maybe I'm just not seeing it. I'm like, okay, whatever, I guess. But when I have my migraines, like when I lose my vision, I'm puking. Like that's a whole nother ball game though. Like my face is in the toilet for a long time, and that's a whole different ball game. But she's referring to just when I have like little colds or something. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she's right. Who knows?
Well, and that's exactly, it's important. I'm glad you said that because that's a big difference between like the man cold of babe. That's a big difference between I can't operate right now because I'm in so much pain or discomfort or, nausea that, nausea, that sounded
both.
Weird. Yeah, right. It's like caramel or caramel. I'm a caramel guy myself, but I say caramel sometimes. Do you? Caramel feels a little more like thick and smacky, and caramels you have some caramel. This is a little bit of caramel, just a little bit.
It's like the European way, like classier way to say it, or something like that.
Like aluminium.
Yeah.
Or zebra or Zed. I think it's so weird that as Americans we say Z when like the rest of the world. I think I shouldn't say the rest of the world, but like a big portion of the world says Z.
Huh? I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's weird. Well, it's the same thing though. We follow, follow Fahrenheit. We follow feet. You know what I mean? It's like who decided we were gonna change from the rest of the world that uses meters and centimeters? We use feet.
We just wanted to be special. That's all.
Classic. Classic Americans. We're going to do it our way. We did it my way.
Well, you ready to talk a little bit of fitness for the Friday debrief today?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
And I thought this would be appropriate too, because if you walk around the gym, it's very easy to see people performing movements in a less than optimal way. Now, so the title or the topic today is common exercise mistakes, but I want to be very clear when I say exercise technique or perfect form, that's very hard to define. And sometimes, myself included, I'm sure I've done this in the past, we can create roadblocks for people to improve when we get too perfectionist with movements.
Mm.
I believe, as with a lot of things in fitness and what we talk about, there's a spectrum to this, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're doing a movement and maybe it's not perfect form, whatever that means, even though that's not even a real thing. That doesn't mean you necessarily can't, go up and weight in the near future. It just means, learn as you go. Let's perform these movements safely, of course. We don't need perfect, but just think of a lifelong learning process and a lifelong endeavor to be better. And again, that it's hard to define like what's good technique or good form.
Mm.
And really, I would say there's only a few parameters that you can say in a blanket statement type of way, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them with a movement that I feel would be fair to say as a blanket statement is you are balanced while you're performing the movement. So it's a very simple thing. So, for example, if you're squatting and you're not balanced and you feel like you're going to fall back or forward, most would agree that would be something that you'd have to fix. Now, other things that we talk about all the time, like knock knees or knee valgus, where our knees cave in during our squat or things like that, there's a little bit more argument there, whether that's safe or not safe or, optimal, less than optimal type of thing. There's more arguments with things like that. But balance, I would say, balance through the movement and just confidence while you're doing that movement. I would say those are some of the blanket statements that we can say for this. So the point of this episode is not to knock anyone. It's not to say you need to have this perfect form to continue or to move on or to progress. That's not what we're trying to do at all. These are just common things that we see in the gym that most likely most of these people, myself included, can make small improvements toward to lift. I would say more efficiently. That would
Yeah,
probably be
that's
the best way,
yeah.
efficiently and confidently, and all of those good things. So let's
I,
start
I,
with
I, I want to jump in real quick before you
yeah.
head into them. When we're talking about, you mentioned the fact that you don't necessarily need to have perfect form in order to move on. A lot of times what we're talking about up front is we're talking about learning how to execute with, and I've got air quotes here, perfect form with lower weight, so that when you go up in weight and naturally the resistance is to a point that it's going to change that form, that you are prepared to operate with strength and control once you have that really heavy weight that is going to take you out of, again, air quote,
Mm.
perfect form, right? So this is just a little context for what Jake and I are about to go into. And reiterating that, like Jake said, we're not saying, oh, hey, don't go do all these things. We're saying, as you're going through your workouts, these are the things that we find as trainers and as people with some kind of professional background in fitness. These are things that we see or that we may have done, and or again, common things that just to look out for, right?
I actually like the word you used better than I did. I said balance.
Mm.
The word you used, I think, was even better. You said control. I think that might be more appropriate to what I'm trying to articulate here is control, because you could use that word, I feel like, in a more broad way. So you are in control while you are lifting. The weight isn't controlling you. Maybe that's a better blanket statement that we could say.
Well, I would argue that in order for you to find that balance, or sorry, in order for you to find that control, you need to have balance, at least some semblance of it.
Mm.
And that can be, yes, balance, physical balance, like, am I falling over? Or it can be muscular system balance. But, making sure that those, in order to gain that control, you have to have a foundation of some kind of balance in your foundation. And, there are different types of balance we can talk about, because balance is somewhat of an abstract term that gets real specific depending on situation and circumstance. But yeah, that makes while I think that I like what I said about control is really good. Balance is absolutely, that's a big part of that.
I think control, the word you used, I think that's more all encompassing. Like balance
Sure.
could be a part of it. Like you
Yeah,
said, like
true that.
you have to be balanced to be in control. But
Mm-hmm.
I would argue too, you could be balanced, but then still not necessarily be in control
True
of the
that.
weight, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I do like your word better. So we'll definitely go off that for today.
Control.
And I'm sure you looked over some of the notes today, but I know you're going to laugh at some of these because after I say them, I know there's going to be a picture in your head of you seeing exactly what I'm describing here. So let's get into number one, and this is the leg press. So this is a great exercise, and it's among some of the most popular machines used in the gym, at least for legs, I would say. And it has some similar benefits as a squat does, but there's less overall axial loading, and overall doesn't require quite as much skill, at least in my opinion. It's a little bit, I wouldn't call it low skill. I would call it lower skill than a back squat, since you're
Totally.
sitting against a pad and a machine, and it controls the concentric and eccentric portion of the movement for you. So you don't really have to do that balancing part quite as much. You do have to be in control, like Clayton had said, but balance, I wouldn't say that's as much of a factor as in the back squat. Anyways,
Totally.
you're going to, with this movement, you're going to work your quads, glutes, and hamstrings. And while doing this, let's go over some very common mistakes. So I'm going to say it. I know you would, I'm pretty confident in saying you would agree with this
Oh
first
yeah,
one. This is what you would see. People
absolutely.
do way too much weight on this.
Number one
And
mistake made in the gym, period. I would probably,
oh,
well, at least
actually,
in
good
resistance
point.
work, period.
There's just something about the leg press because you get this visual, like everyone can so obviously
Yeah.
see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has seen this, people loading up 8 plates on each side,
Right.
and then the range of motion, they literally go down like 3 inches.
Well, plus they
Now,
might poop themselves a little bit.
yeah, but you know what I'm saying though. Like literally they're going down a couple inches, and you
Yeah.
can see this from all over the gym. You see someone, not that you can always tell if someone's strong, but most likely you see someone that's 140 pounds loading up 8 plates on each side. More times than not, that person probably can't do that much weight. I would guarantee that same person, if they're loading up 8 plates going down 2 or 3 inches on the machine, if they went over to do a squat,
Mm-hmm.
they probably couldn't even do a moderate amount of weight. Now, I know
Oh,
that's kind of,
absolutely.
again, a blanket statement, but way too much weight. Now, we're going to get into this in more detail in a second, but going down just a couple inches, sure, you can make the argument for partial range of motion in different scenarios for different goals. Like, athletes, I think there's some case for that for sure. But I don't think the people that are doing this with the leg press are doing it because they're just trying to do partial range of motion.
No.
I think they're doing it because it's an ego thing, and they
Yeah.
want to lift as much weight as possible, even if they're not utilizing all that form.
It
And
looks
so
cool. Well, they think it looks cool.
exactly. And so that goes right into point number 2. I already said it, and that is a short range of motion. And the partials, I feel a little conflicted with partials because outside of injury, for whatever reason, if your muscle tissue can't tolerate that range of motion yet because of an injury, or athletic programming, I could see the case for that for sure, doing partials, because there's some carryover there.
When
Uh,
people are coming in without having any floor of use and any idea of what to do,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
exactly. So it makes sense there. Besides that, if you're able, and if you're able to be in control throughout the range of motion, normally I would say it's better to expose yourself to that range of motion at a lighter weight. So go through that full range of motion and don't load 8 plates up on each side if you know you can't do anywhere near that with a full range of motion. That's my suggestion anyway. And this also goes into the next point. These all kind of all go hand in hand. It's kind of the same person doing this, and that's placing your hands on your knees. So I don't have any great or elaborate points here. People place their hands on their knees to assist their legs when the weight gets heavy. So this is all in the same ballpark essentially. So, excuse me, too much weight, only going down a couple inches, and the weight's so heavy they don't feel like they can push the weight up. So they push their legs with their hands to help get the weight up. So that's all kind of goes hand in hand. So that would be, I would argue to say those are the most common mistakes if we can categorize them in one thing because they go hand in hand so well.
I mean, as you and we said, these things, they're really, those are subsets. So those are subsections of the point that way too much weight is the main mistake that people are making, right? Because people put on too much weight. Obviously, all these things that Jake said, those mistakes can be made on their own, which is why they're presented in this way. But always, if you load too much weight onto, in particular, the leg press, always you're going to get short range of motion. Always you're going to at least feel the need to give yourself further stabilization when there's too much weight. That's not going to not happen, right? So it's really important that when we're talking about these specific problems that keep you from progressing and could potentially introduce other problems, that it comes back to the core problem of way too much weight. And that's a problem that nobody ever needs to make, because the alternative to adding too much weight is the right amount or too little. So you're not risking anything by not putting more weight on. So the idea that, so again, like we said, short range of motion is a problem in this context. But like I mentioned when Jake was talking about it, a short range of motion might be the perfect thing for somebody who's coming off the street without having ever done a squat before, right? So as we've talked about, context is everything. But by intentionally lowering the weight, even if you think it's lower than it should be, you are eliminating these problems. At least you are eliminating these problems as a consequence of having put on too much weight.
And you can always add more. That's a great
Yep.
thing. You do a set and you realize it's not as heavy as you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
The RP wasn't high enough, or whatever it is, whatever you're trained for that day. You can always add weight. It's really simple.
Yep.
You do a couple reps. You're like, okay, this feels like I'm lifting absolutely nothing. Just add a little bit of weight. There's no need and there's no rush to start with this massive amount of weight that you're going to go down just a couple inches with.
Absolutely. And it's way, way, way safer to do it from the perspective of, because, like Jake said, you can always add a weight. You can't reduce weight and keep going once you've blown out your kneecap or whatever. That was a bad example. That's a really dramatic example. But if you overdo it and you hurt yourself, it's time for rest. You don't get to like take weight off the rack and try again, right? But if you go too light of weight, the consequences are, okay, I didn't get as good of a workout as I thought, or as good of a set as I thought. So it's time to add a little bit more weight, try to fine tune that, right?
Yep, that's it. That's it right there. And a next point here, which doesn't necessarily have to do with having too much weight, but it can, depending on the person, that is allowing your butt to raise off of the seat while you're leg pressing. So although this is not a back squat, I still do try to transfer a few of the skills that are required for an effective back squat over to the leg press. And one of them being not letting your pelvis tuck or tilt to a high degree. So not letting there be too much lumbar extension or flexion. So if your butt is tilting, it's most likely going to be flexing, if you can kind of picture what I'm talking about. But side note here, remember, it's impossible to have a completely straight or neutral spine. So I want to make sure we're saying that very clearly. You cannot have a perfectly straight spine when you're squatting or really doing anything whatsoever. So that's not the expectation. A little bit of flexion, a little bit of extension, that is not dangerous in and itself. So just keep that in mind. But from an efficiency standpoint, it is best not to have your spine tilt or tuck too much and lift off the seat. It's just showing that weight is probably, again, too much for you, or you're not really paying attention to the rest of your body besides your legs. So
With
remember, oh, go
so
ahead.
I'm so sorry. I thought you were transitioning out.
Oh
Apologies.
no, so I was just saying, just remember, if you can, full range of motion, back flat against the pad, and have control of the weight. And if you do it properly, you can feel your core,
Yep.
or I would say
That's literally what I was going
more
to say.
more strictly your abdominals.
Yeah.
You can feel them working in a similar fashion than you would when you are squatting. If you're not allowing your pelvis to just fly off the pad, so that's something that you're going to notice if you're doing it correctly.
I was trying to interrupt Jake to say that. I was not trying to interrupt you, but when I actually interrupted you, what I was going to say was pretty much what Jake said right after that, which is, I'll say it in my own words, having a structurally neutral spine. You know, you're not hyperextended, you're not hyperflexed. Is going to be the key to having a solid core strength foundation. If we are constantly using the leg press, we're really kind of pushing our, like, the back of our butt. So like our glutes are like pressed up against the back pad. And then we're really pushing from that point with just the leg press, almost completely removing the entire core engagement. And not completely, because, you know, obviously when you start getting higher, you start using your core more. But the idea being is with the back pad there, laying down in your back, all that supported. Whereas, as Jake's talking about with something like a back squat, you're standing up. You have to stabilize that core. You have to hold. Say if you're doing back squat, you have dumbbells or barbells or a barbell. You've got to keep that core engaged, which is just something you're not doing when you're when you're doing it on the mat. So you really want to try to emulate that recreation of the core engagement while you're doing the leg press, in order for it to just be more functional. And it's one of those things where it's really the difference of just kind of visualizing, using your core when you're doing it on the leg press. Like those of us who are used to engaging our core or not will know that even though from an outsider looking in, you might not notice a difference, somebody who is on that leg press with their core properly engaged with that proper spine position is going to be stronger, it's going to be more powerful and safer.
Yeah, I like the awareness aspect that you're talking about. If you're aware that your back is on the pad and your pelvis isn't tucking, that alone you'll feel it a little bit more in your core, even though you don't have to stabilize to the same degree you would obviously in a back squat. If you're aware of what your spine and your pelvis are doing, it's going to help head to toe your whole body just being stronger on the lift as well. And moving on to the next one, and I know you've seen this too, Clay, a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
times, and this is pull-ups. And we're the same issues we see in these other movements we talk about today. A lot of them are going to be the same, so it might sound a little bit repetitive,
Mm-hmm.
but that's okay. So pull-ups, we're going to start with the range of motion. So people's range of motion is pretty terrible with pull-ups. And again, I think most of the time this is an ego thing. We want to be able to do these body weight pull-ups or even weighted pull-ups, and of course, look like we know what we're doing in the gym. But most people, they will lower themselves sometimes just a couple inches below the bar and then pull themselves up, and their chin isn't even quite to the bar. So what we do want to do, if we are able and our body allows us, we do want to allow our arms to extend completely at the bottom. And as we pull up, it's great if we can get our chin over the bar. That would be the range of motion goals for this movement. And I can see again the utility with partials. Like, say, you're someone that's introducing a little bit more range of motion every single time you do a pull up and eventually getting the full range of motion. But I don't think that's the reason, though, again, why people aren't doing the full range of motion. Now, I've seen this too. this is going to go hand in hand with the first point that I just made with the short range of motion. And this is adding too much additional resistance. Now, I'm a huge fan of adding weight to what would normally be a gymnastic or a body weight movement. I think it's a very underutilized tool, like say with dips, with pull-ups, anything like that. Adding weight, if you're able, is great. When I don't think it's so great is like what I've seen multiple times the last couple weeks. So someone will go up to the pull-up bar, they have their chain belt on and have a 45-pound plate to do the pull-up. I'm like, okay, great, that's awesome. Seeing people do that because not too many people, add weight to body weight type movements. But then what happens? They jump up and they lower themselves down again about 2 or 3 inches, just like on the leg press, but instead it's the pull up. They go down just a few inches, and because they aren't strong enough to pull themselves up, they then do kind of a kip with their hip to get their chin close to the bar. And a lot of times their chin doesn't even end up getting to the bar. So at that point, when we're adding weight and it's shortening our range of motion that much, let's stick to just using our body weight and being efficient with that. And there's a lot of options in the gym too. You have a resistance band, you can put a leg in there and do pull-ups that way to do the full range of motion. The reason I'm not a huge fan of that is that people bounce a ton and get a lot of momentum. I think if you work on not allowing it to bounce you, so you're just in control a little bit more, I think it can be a great movement. And then you also have the option, there's a lot of pull-up machines where there's a weight that can assist you. The main thing here is if we're working on getting a body weight pull-up on our own, is whatever progression you're using to get to a pull-up, just do it under control. That's the main thing. Don't bounce, don't jump, don't kip if your goal is to be able to get a strict pull-up. Did you have something there, Clay? Your eyes rolled it up.
Yeah, actually, in fact, I had like 3 or 4 things that I wanted to say over the period of time, which I'm probably going to like remember one of them, but I'll go for it anyway. The couple of the things here. Do you remember about 10 years ago, there was a moment that you and I had that that was, I think, a little bit of an origin for this whole podcast?
Did you say 10 years ago?
Yeah, about 10 years ago.
Remind me.
It might have been a little longer than that, but I think we were joining Brian. It might have been, I can't remember if it was in Long Beach or if it was in Northern California, but we were at like a 24-hour fitness or something, and it was like you, me, and Brian, or you, me, and Andrew or something, and we were all doing our own thing, and you were already a trainer at this point, and I was not going to become a trainer for another few years, but as we've talked about, I grew up in the business, and you happened to walk by me as I was doing pull-ups. And I think as a trainer who's very used to seeing people execute pull-ups incorrectly, I think you were expecting that. And I did it because, again, I grew up in the business. So my dad taught me, lift with your lats first. And then, you bring up your full range of motion, you're nullifying momentum, which is the other thing that I want to bring back up after I come back around, is nullifying momentum and the importance of that. But basically what happened was I did a proper pull up, where I brought myself up and brought myself all the way back down, and you were like, all right, dude. And not only was that a moment for you recognizing that I knew what I was doing, but it was a moment for me recognizing that you knew what you were doing, because I was used to, like, especially at that time, especially when you're in your early 20s, you're used to seeing everybody execute pull-ups the way that you just talked about, which is like way too much weight, not well done, and kind of not even to the point of like functionally, they're not going to do a very good job of lifting themselves or lowering themselves down in the real world if they're ever going to have to do that, because you want to have control when you do that if you're dangling 20 feet above the ground, right? Anyway, my point is that I grew up in a place, like in a mindset where it's like, I always had this fantasy that like, some big yacht dude was gonna come and be like, "Oh, you know how you do it, bro," and I'd be like, "Actually, guy, I know better," in whatever nice way I was gonna do it. And our interaction this 10 years ago was like the exact opposite of that interaction, right? You were like, somebody who was certified and knew what they were talking about, came by, not really, we're friends and, we've been friends a long time, but you didn't really know what, like, I don't think we'd really worked out together at that point,
No, I don't think so either.
Right? So do you remember that though?
So it's coming back to my mind. What I do remember is when you guys lived in Long Beach, we did go to a 24-hour fitness that was kind of close to downtown,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember working out together. That exact moment, I'm trying to like, look back and remember, but I do remember us going there when you guys all lived in Long Beach.
Yeah, I mean, we went fairly regularly, and I'm pretty sure you actually might have even gone to those 24-hour fitnesses more than I did, because you would come and like work out with the guys, and I'd be like, yeah, nah. We're like,
That was fun though.
right.
It was fun going up to Long Beach, and then like I don't know if you ever did this, but AJ and I would go run in the sand and just
Oh
get
yeah, I did that.
destroyed trying to do some endurance stuff. It was a lot of fun for sure.
Dude, my endurance training was definitely at its peak when I was living in Long Beach, because you'd go for a run, and it's like, am I gonna not run on the beach? No, that's dumb. And we lived on the beach, right? So it's like, and I'll tell you, I remember getting out there and being like, God, this is brutal. And then being about a year and a half in, and like realizing, I was like, oh, this is not hard at all. It's just because we had just adapted to running in the sand,
Yeah.
which is an amazing adaptation. Um, but coming back to the topic at hand, um, what did I say? Nullify momentum. That's going to be a really important concept when we're talking about anybody who's building their foundational skills. Um,
Ooh, I like that foundational skills. I love that.
and it's really an important point, because once you get to a certain point, especially in resistance work, I'd say across the board probably, um, you start incorporating power and explosiveness in order to get to that next level. And power and explosiveness requires speed, or some semblance of speed, right? And when you start doing that, you're controlling momentum. But the way that we learn to control momentum is by first learning how to nullify that momentum. Because when we're building our foundational skills, more likely than not, any use of your momentum is going to be a detriment to your results in your program, because you are relieving yourself of that resistance by picking up momentum. For example, kipping. Kipping is where, and correct me if there's any specificity to kipping that I miss here, but it's just basically you're basically using your body weight to kind of pop yourself up and create a little momentum to get yourself up over that bar, right?
Yeah, it's essentially like distributing the power. It's basically from your hips. You
Mm.
start, at least pull in the terms of a pull up. You start your momentum with your shoulders, but then the actual kip part comes from momentum with your hips that carries to the rest of your body. So yeah, absolutely.
So what that momentum does, that takes relief, that relieves the resistance, allowing you to continue to do more repetitions. But as soon as we take any action, whether it's kipping or another action that relieves that tension, all of a sudden we've broken up time under tension. And that's a really important concept to work with when you're building foundational skills, because time under tension is going to be what allows you to learn and grow and develop to a point where you can lift those heavier weights with control. So I realize that I've introduced a couple of concepts in this kind of subheading of this section, but the idea simply being that when we're building our foundational skills, we want to nullify our momentum. And when we're talking about when we're talking about doing pull-ups, one of the number one things that people do is they see somebody who's going aggressive and kipping, because that person who's kipping that they see is going high rep, right? And that's why they're using kipping. And they're like, okay, that's how I do pull-ups. But that's not what they want to be doing. What you want to be doing if you're building those foundational skills is you want to be nullifying the momentum, building the strength, building the control, building the stability and the intent that you need in order to execute the movement properly. And then once you mastered all that, now you can start talking about high weight, high rep, using technique and momentum to increase repetition or overall anaerobic endurance or aerobic endurance, right? Depending on what we're talking about. But the idea again being that we want to walk one foot in front of the other, build the system on top of the system, and in this case, when we're talking about pull-ups, that means nullifying your momentum.
Yeah, so crawl, walk, run type of idea.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the foundational idea. And what Clayton was saying right there too, we're actually to come back to in just a sec. We're going to give you a few more specifics, but we did have one in between point to bring up with you, which is another thing I see all the time. Now, arguably this is splitting hairs a little bit, but we're going to talk about it anyway, and that is biasing your biceps a little bit too much, or just using too much bicep. Now, what I mean is most people start the pull up or engage with their biceps first, so they're basically yanking down on their elbows to pull themselves up. If you notice, it seems as though you're just using your bicep. What you can try doing instead of doing that is depressing your shoulder blades first to start the movement, then pulling from there. By doing
Nice.
that, you can bias your lats a little bit more. I don't want to act like doing one of the other of these cancels out the other muscle. That's not how it works at all. But if you want to bias your larger muscles, which would be your lats in this exercise versus your biceps, pull down on those shoulder blades first and then pull yourself up. Now, this is splitting hairs. I don't necessarily think this is super important. This is more for the people just feel like they're just using their arms to pull up. But go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm there with you too. This is a not as with a lot of times we're saying like, oh, make sure you're being really careful. This is something that you can probably be fine. It's like not going to be a problem if you do this your whole life. You're just
Right.
going to be doing it that as effectively as you can. And it actually goes back to the story that Jake and I were just talking about 10 years ago. The key difference in my pull up that caught Jake's attention was that I depressed my shoulder blades first, thereby lifting my body using my lats before I went into that into the arm engagement. And then I did the same thing in reverse. I lowered myself with my arm engagement, and then I let my lats let myself all the way down. It's all together a little more fluid than that in execution. But I really loved that you said depress the shoulder blades, because that's a verbiage I've never used before that I'm going to use now. So thanks.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, if you use it with a client or if you do it yourself, let me know if that cue helps you at all,
Definitely.
or helps them, or if they like it. Because some people it makes sense, some it might not. But then again, that's just about every cue. Some people, don't get this cue, but will get this one. I remember as a coach, sometimes I could have done a way better job. I would have a cue that I would feel like that's so simple and so effective and can be understood easily, but no matter how many times you say it to the person you're coaching, they might not necessarily understand. So I failed as a coach a lot of times, instead of trying different cues, forcing the cue that I thought was best. I don't know if you've ever done that, but
Oh yeah.
I definitely did that a ton of times for sure.
Well, when you start out as a trainer, if you're lucky, you get two tools, a pen and a hammer. We know we got to write stuff
Mm,
down with a pen, but the hammer, it's like, if that's the only tool we got, we keep using it. Sometimes it's a screw, right? So
dude.
we all start there, with just a hammer,
Or this we probably talked about this on a Friday debrief before, but over cueing.
Mm-hmm. Oh
That is
yeah.
huge with,
Ooh yeah.
I would
I
say,
get.
inexperienced coaches, but
Yeah.
plenty of coaches do that. I'm sure even there was some point I did that even when I wasn't a beginner. I'm sure I overcued. You just get really excited, I think, and want to help the person.
Yeah.
But overcuing, like telling someone 10 different cues
Right.
in while they're doing a squat, that's not going to be super effective, especially for a novice type of lifter. That's not going to do anything. I always figured after a while, I realized this at least, to kind of do an assessment or triage, like what are the big rocks, what are the
Yeah.
important ones, like safety being first obviously, and then you can go down the line of efficiency there. What do they need right now versus let's overwhelm them by
Right.
telling them the biomechanics of a squat from head to toe. Like
Totally.
I for sure did that, and I've definitely seen other coaches do that too.
It's an easy mistake to make, and I would argue that if you're doing your job as a trainer, you're gonna make that mistake before you realize that you need to pull it back and get more savvy with how you're doing it, right? I'll say one of the things, and that's absolutely a trap I fall into more often than I would like, but I can tell you this is just my go-to fix for it. Hopefully it helps some other trainer who might be listening out there to this. But what I do when I realize that I've overcued, I say, I take a literally. Sometimes I'll take a step back for myself and be like, reset myself a little bit and realize that I'm over cueing. And then what I say personally to my client is, and then forget everything I just told you, because the reality is all that information I gave them is good information that they will likely absorb if they stop trying to absorb it. You know what I'm saying? Or at least they will absorb some of that, but us trying to like do this communication aspect can be, can get in our own way of communicating, right? So yeah.
And then too, like, and it goes hand in hand with overcueing, is watching someone for 1 or 2 reps and then you're just saying 100 cues in 2 seconds. It's like, okay, let people, unless there's something where you literally think what they're doing is not safe, let people do a couple reps, let them finish their set. They don't need, in the middle of their squat to hear 100 things after they've done 2 reps. And plus I think a experienced coach too would realize, like, they want to see more than a rep or two.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you really think you can dissect and then diagnose with what someone needs after a rep or two, I think maybe that's an ego thing again. I know I definitely did that at times too, but I know I'm digressing with our point here. But definitely if you're a coach, like Clayton was saying, don't overcue.
Yeah.
It's not going to help anyone.
Well, and it's also worth noting that it's going to be very drastically based on who you're working with, right? Because you have some clients who, like for me, I'll only speak for myself. I've got some clients who it's more advantageous to stop the movement and for us just to talk about the biomechanics of that movement. I've got other clients where if I did that, they would just they would just glaze over and it would be a waste of 2 minutes, right? So, as a trainer, as a coach, we're also playing the artist and the scientist, right? And here comes a little bit of the science where we got a little trial and error, and a little bit of the art, which is kind of feeling out what's right in that specific situation. I would say, as we've gotten inadvertently down this tangential route, I would say, as especially a young trainer, be open to trusting your instinct, trusting your gut. If something feels like you're overdoing something, if something feels like you're underdoing something, investigate it a little bit. And number one way to do that is to communicate with the person you're working with, because they'll tell you. Yep. Or they won't, and then you do your best. But usually clients will tell you. If you've created a situation where they feel like they can be open and honest with you, which again, in my opinion, I feel like all of us trainers should be doing, they're going to tell you, how they feel about that. So.
Absolutely. And back to pull-ups, and Clayton basically hit these points already, so I'm going to condense this. And my point here was going to be pull-ups that turn into kipping pull-ups. So we hit most of those points already. These are really popular in CrossFit, but as Clayton had mentioned, let's work on the foundational skill first before we kip, if that's something you want to do. I don't see the utility with doing kipping pull-ups if it's outside of CrossFit or CrossFit competition. I don't really see a need for it unless you would like to, I guess. But something you can do if you notice you just can't stop with, this momentum from your hips to be able to do the pull-up. So you can perform a pull-up in a hollow body position. Gymnasts, do this, and this is where CrossFit stole it from. So a hollow body, I'm going to do my absolute best to describe this. If it confuses you, please look this up online so you can actually see what I mean by hollow body. So a hollow body, when referring to a pull-up, so think you're hanging onto a pull-up bar, your arms are completely extended, and instead of your feet straight down beneath you or behind you a little bit like a lot of people do, your feet are actually in front of you a little bit. So if you were looking at a side view, it would almost look like the shape of not quite a C, but the way people describe it that I would hear a lot would be like kind of like a banana. I know that sounds kind of funny. So the hollow body position, when you have your feet in front of you like that, it really helps to combat the momentum issue where you feel like you need momentum from your hips to be able to pull yourself up to the top of the bar. So if you put your feet in front of you, I would say they're a little bit past where the pull-up bar is. That is a good place to start. And you're going to probably feel it in your core a little bit too. And it's going to make it a lot more difficult to kip. So remember, foundational first before we move on to anything advanced. And even CrossFit coaches, good CrossFit coaches, would say the same thing, to learn to do a foundational pull-up first before you start kipping. But people get excited and they want to go straight to the kipping pull-up because it's fun and it's cool looking,
Right.
and it's, after you learn the technique a little bit, it's obviously easier than a strict pull-up. So
What's funny is I personally, so a lot of times when we're talking about fitness stuff, it's counterintuitive, and I feel like this is one of those cases too, because when you're not as experienced, yeah, it totally looks cool to see somebody do 30 pull-ups, right? But when you start to learn about what a real pull-up entails, not a real pull-up, a non-kipping pull-up entails, you recognize that there's no way that they could do those 30 pull-ups doing a proper, again, struggling with the verbiage here, but a more traditional pull-up, right? A non-kipping pull-up.
a strict
pull-up. Thank you.
There you go.
So I would argue that for those of us who are a little more educated, learning this this style where your hollow body pull-up, where your feet are kind of in front of you, and I've got it pulled up here, Jake, on the video, so anyone who's watching can see. And what happens is, for those of us who are more educated, we walk into a gym and we see somebody doing really good pull-ups with nullified momentum with this hollow body form, and we're like, oh damn, that's hella cool. Like, that looks good. Because the next step to that is, and we've seen this in whenever we watch the Olympics or any kind of gymnastics, is bringing that hollow body position so that your legs are now parallel with the ground, right? So now,
like an L pull-up.
Like an L pull-up. Thank you. That's what it's called. So and then you transition to an L pull-up, or some version of that. It might just be that your knees are close to your chest and you're doing, core work with, while holding the bar, and you're bringing your legs up to get ab work done, right? Whatever it is, building that solid foundational core ends up looking a lot cooler than kipping pull-ups. So if your goal is to look cool, going for the classic, the more difficult work, and then getting better at it looks a lot cooler than just doing a bunch of reps, which is, I wonder if folks had that perspective walking into the gym, if they would even get involved in momentum driven lifting, because they would know that momentum driven lifting is a more aggressive version of this less sexy looking form and exercise, right? So it's one of these things where I think we shoot ourselves in the foot based on a perception that is flawed from the start.
I think it's really similar. Like, someone isn't going to learn how to do a clean before they learn how to do a squat.
Right.
Like that's not going to happen, or probably shouldn't happen.
Right.
It's the same exact idea with the pull-up. And moving on to our next movement, and this is going to be a tricep extension or a rope extension, whatever you want to call it. And it's a common theme. I've already said it. The very first thing that we're going to see is people doing way too much weight. And it's pretty comical to think about when people are doing single joint movements, trying to do as much weight as possible. It's really missing the benefit, especially of why we're even doing a single joint movement. It's not supposed to be quite as heavy. We're focusing normally on a muscle group or a few muscle groups in one joint. That's where we're focusing on. So there's no need to try to do one rep maxes all the time with single joint movements like a tricep extension. And another common thing, and the next few that I'm going to talk about here a lot of times are because the weight is too heavy. So these all kind of have to do with each other, just like in some of the other movements we already talked about. And so the next one is letting your hands come up too far during the eccentric portion of the lift. So people do this. Again, this might be hard to picture as I'm describing it here, but as they let their arms come up, or their hands come up during the eccentric portion, what you're doing is allowing yourself to have more momentum for the way down or the concentric portion. So this is 99% of the time because you're lifting too much weight, or it could be just a self-awareness thing and you're not really paying attention. So you don't need to have your arms come up really high up like that during this movement. Now the next point too, very similar, and this is mobile elbows. So it's best, or it's optimal when we're performing a tricep extension, is to have your elbows pinned to the side of your body. That's how I like to think about it, so they don't move around a lot. And what happens when people don't pin their elbows is they start internally rotating their shoulders, which that's not a dangerous thing or anything, but we start internally rotating our shoulders, and then it turns into almost a chest movement. The weight's too heavy, your shoulders internally rotate, your elbows aren't static anymore, they're mobile, and you start pushing down like it's a chest press almost. I'm sure you guys have seen this person at the gym, or maybe you've experienced this yourself. So you're turning your arms in, you're pushing down like it's a chest press, and you're really targeting at that point, other muscles more than you are your triceps. And again, for a single joint movement, we're not trying to hit every different muscle group. that wouldn't be the point of them at all. So don't let it be a chest or a deltoid movement when it's supposed to be for the triceps.
And I'd like to reemphasize the point of keep that weight low. Keep that weight low. It's going to be much easier to accomplish these things. In a phrase, Jake's saying, good form is going to be better for you. You know what I mean? So how do we get good form? We practice with lighter weight. So we have good form, so that when we go up higher weight, we have better form. So whether we're talking concentric, eccentric, flaring in, flaring out, elbows close to the head, elbows not, being open and willing to allowing your form to not be stuck in some kind of place, but rather, as we talk about on this program, a lifelong journey, because just because you do tricep extensions one way now doesn't mean you're going to do them you're going to keep doing them that way. Hopefully what you do is, if you hear that you do any of these things that Jake just mentioned, that you're going to be more aware of them in the gym, which means it's an ongoing perpetual change, as a ongoing perpetual analysis, and an openness to adjustment.
And so just a few takeaways with that. Again, keep your elbows pinned to your sides and stationary, and control the entire range of motion. So you don't need to do tons of weight. It shouldn't be a struggle and working all the other muscle groups. It should be more focused on whatever it is you're trying to work. For example, in the tricep extension, we're focusing on the triceps. All right, moving on to our last movement for the day. And this is our overhead press. This can be barbell or dumbbell. I personally do the barbell overhead press a bit more, but a lot of the same exact quote unquote mistakes will happen with either of them. Now here's the big one. I see probably more people doing this than not, and that is excessive hyperextension of your lumbar spine. And this is especially as we press the weight above our head. Now, this is normally due to the lack of flexibility around your lats, or just the feeling of your lats being tight. That's definitely a possibility, which it's going to prevent us from being able to completely extend our shoulders overhead. Another reason you can just not be aware of what you're doing. After you train for a while, you're going to start to have more of full body awareness and what your body is actually doing. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, due to those two things, people really hyperextend their lower back. They're trying to kind of create a path of least resistance, if you will. So I would say that the excessive extension of the lumbar spine, we do especially the end of the movement, we want all our joints stacked on top of each other with no excessive curvature, especially of our spine. We want it quote unquote straight from top to bottom.
Love
And
it.
then moving on to our next point here, and this is stopping before locking out overhead. Now, the end of the press, the bar should be overhead, and if we could get a bird's eye view and look downwards at the person doing the overhead press, you would be dissecting the middle of your foot. So the bar would be going over your head, dissecting down through your body and over the middle of your foot, if you can somewhat picture that. So that's how also you're going to know that you're balanced throughout the movement. Your head also at the end of the movement should be farther forward than the barbell. So the barbell is actually just slightly behind your head. A lot of people will finish with the bar directly above their traps. It is acceptable, though, of course, if you're not quite that far and you're more over toward about the back of your head. But if you're completely locked out, your head's through most of the time, the bar is going to be directly above your traps. So next time you're pressing, if you have a mirror or something, you could take a look to see where you actually are with your press and how you end. A lot of people, they will stop the press way short of lockout when they don't have to. And this could be for a couple of reasons. I do think in especially I don't want to even call it the bodybuilding community, because, just everyday people do this too. People want to have this constant tension on their muscle, and they'll stop short of lockout to do that. I do feel the benefits favor a little bit to you do the full range of motion, especially when we're talking about strength. So don't feel like you're doing something wrong by completely locking out. I just remember when I was younger, I would hear that all the time. I guess that's another myth. We haven't really talked about that one before. It's not locking out, and that it's really bad for your joints. I remember as a teenager, I'd hear that, and that is unbelievably not true.
Mm,
That
I
it
never
being
heard that.
bad for your joints.
Yeah, I never got that.
Oh, you never heard that one?
No. I was taught to go full through your full range of motion, um, while also it's basically writing that fine line, right, where you go through that full range of motion, but you still I forget the other part of the aspect of that you were just talking about, but it's the idea, whether you're developing it now or not, is finding, kind of getting the best of both worlds with that, right? Because you don't want to go, so get that full range of motion while also protecting yourself, I guess is what I'm saying, right? Because you still want to be safe, right? Because there's always, you can get that full range of motion, go all the way out to failure, go all the way 100%, and have the weight over your head without any strength to bring it back down and control it. So we're talking about a real minute thing, and that was not even your point. And I realized I got tangential with that too. But, the theme here is being more aware of your body so that you can more effectively do the exercise. In this case, if you get used to doing this movement properly, you're going to know what it feels like to have that weight stay along your midline. As you get used to doing that properly, that also means that as you come out of that midline, you're going to be more aware of the feeling of that weight either pulling you forward or pulling you backwards. And that's the feeling that allows you to fine tune to the place where you're able to keep that right along that midline that Jake's talking about, and stay in control of the weights while bringing yourself through full range of motion, and doing the exercise effectively and efficiently.
And then one little tip too that you can try if you notice it's hard to lock out, and assuming your lats don't feel tight and it feels fine all around there, is you can try a slightly wider grip on the barbell. You don't have to exaggerate any of this too much, but I do notice a lot of people go very narrow, which makes the range of motion longer, that's not bad whatsoever, but just with our arms closer together, it will require more flexibility to get it all the way overhead. That's probably a more appropriate way to say it. So if you go a little bit wider, especially with those of you that have really long arms, this will make it a little bit easier for you to be able to lock out at the top. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the show. And if you could leave us a review, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can find us on Instagram at Mission Driven Made. You can also find us at the forum, which is our free online fitness community and platform, which is on Facebook. I'm going to put a link for it in the show notes here. And the forum is a place where you can go to connect with other listeners of the podcast. It's also a place where you can go to ask Clayton or I questions, anything fitness related. We'd be happy to have you and happy to answer any questions you may have. All right, everyone, we hope you have a fantastic rest of your Friday. And until next time, stay mission driven.
All right, Twitch viewers, now's your time to do your live Q&A with Jake and myself. I haven't seen anybody drop in, so we're not going to spend too much time waiting around for the Q&A, but if you do have a question, now's the time. We love answering whatever questions you may have. Now, if you are listening over YouTube or well, I guess you wouldn't be hearing this if you're listening over Spotify. But if you're listening to this and you would like to ask a question, but it's not a live show, know that you can reach out to us over the forum or our Instagram or our soon to be Discord. So don't hesitate to reach out. We've got you. So until then, as always, like Jake said, stay mission driven.